and welcome to Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast with Renae Hanvin, which is all about inspiring you to start thinking and doing disasters a little bit differently too. In this episode, I'm talking with Anna Deer, Public Affairs and Sustainability Manager at Coca-Cola South Pacific, and we're talking about unprecedented disasters and how they provide new ways for corporate giving. So a little bit about Anna. Anna's got a similar background to me from media, communications and corporate philanthropy. She currently leads on sustainability and community investment initiatives at Coca-Cola South Pacific, as well as being on the advisory committee of the Coca-Cola Australia Foundation. Starting her career as a news producer with Sky News Australia, I didn't do that, Anna has since worked in both corporate and non-profit roles in Australia and London, including the AMP Foundation, the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute, and Cancer Council New South Wales. Anna has a particular passion for social justice and addressing the underlying causes of homelessness. She's a non-executive director of the Sydney Street Choir Foundation and has been a monthly volunteer with Youth Off the Streets food vans for over 15 years. Anna, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Renae.
Now, I like to start with where we met, and sometimes this is a long history and sometimes not so much. So I pretty much reached out to you on LinkedIn because when the bushfires happened in Australia at the start of 2020, I was watching what a lot of the corporates were doing, and your approach to bushfires I thought was really quite innovative. So after a quick conversation, we then met when I invited you to participate on the Public-Private Partnerships Network, and we had a roundtable in Sydney, which I think was probably about February this year.
I think it was before the world turned upside down, but it was lovely to meet then.
Yeah, no, it was great to connect. And as I said, I think we've got quite a similar background. So it's really great for me to connect with others who come from a like-minded kind of foundation. Absolutely. Now, I'd like to talk to you about obviously bushfires and COVID-19, but can we start with kind of where we met relating to the Black Summer bushfires, which obviously happened at the start of 2020. Now, your response to the bushfires was, in my opinion, innovative, authentic, and really true to your brand values, and we've had some conversations about this. So can you tell me, was your response planned based on a planned strategy, or was it really quite reactive to the situation?
Yeah, thanks, Renae. And it's really lovely to hear that feedback because we don't often hear lovely things like that, but it is really nice for you to preface that. But look, I think in terms of disaster relief, our response is always tailored to the specific situation at hand. We do obviously have a set of tools and funds and working groups set up that we would mobilise in any disaster situation. And that includes our global Coca-Cola Foundation that has a disaster relief fund set up to provide humanitarian support, and in-house teams that we would kind of immediately mobilise to come up with the broader strategic response. And that includes leads from, our public affairs and comms and sustainability teams and finance and legal to sort of help lead and guide us through the process. But, I think it always is tailored because, all disasters are different. And I think, the last thing you want is for a big corporate like Coke to come in and tell a community or an NGO what they need. So it is really important for us to have a response that's, that's community-led and that we're listening to what the community needs as well. So in this instance, our bushfire response, I think, was a really great example of how we sort of really leveraged the Coke system. And by system, I mean, so Coca-Cola Company, who I work for, so specifically Coca-Cola South Pacific, and we have a network of bottlers around the world that we work with. So we look after the brands and the marketing and the formulas that go into the drinks, and our bottlers look after the manufacturing and distribution of all of our products. And in Australia, that's Coca-Cola Amatil, who many would be familiar with. But I think, this was a really great way that we came together as a system and really leveraged all the resources that we had at hand, both locally and globally, to support such a huge crisis. So yeah, it was a really good opportunity for us. Do you want me to talk about what we actually did?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, because again, when we were watching about who was giving wash, and obviously there was cash, like great cash donations coming out, and also other in-kind donations. And of course, we had the Fireys cans. So yeah, I'd be really keen to hear if you can explain what were the types of things that you gave, and I guess what was the decision behind it.
Yeah, sure. So, we really did start our support right when the fire sort of began in kind of, mid to late 2019. We had a lot of product requests coming in. So from, partners like Food Bank and also kind of later in the year from the Defence Force, and they were sort of being facilitated by both us and Amatul. And obviously that's a really tangible way that we can support something like that, and obviously drinks and refreshments were actually really needed at that time, and it wasn't really though until we came back in the very early new year that we, I guess, were like we need to be doing more. And again, we got together as a system to really talk and nut out what we could do to actually provide further support and further leverage our networks. So that involved all sorts of things, from product to cash and philanthropic donations to also customer assistance. So we ended up working with Salvation Army, who we have a long partnership with, and we facilitated $1 million donation from the global Coca-Cola Foundation. And we actually used our contacts in the US. So the US Salvation Army, who were already set up in the system. So that kind of just allowed the process to be much more efficient and ensure that the funds actually landed in the hands of those that needed it much more quickly. And I guess, again, that's the benefit of working in a global organisation like Coke, is that you do have those networks, and administrative efficiencies set up. We also made a business contribution from Coca-Cola South Pacific to each of the fire services in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, of $250,000, I guess, to acknowledge the work that had been going on there, and obviously really to support, all of the amazing and incredible work that all the volunteers particularly were providing at the time. And then our bottler Amatul also provided, over $375,000 in product donations, and also customer financial assistance packages. So that was really an acknowledgement that, a whole heap of local communities and small business owners, and who Amatul would call their customers, were incredibly stretched at the time, but the level of community support and community giving and generosity was amazing. So that was things like waiving invoices that would inevitably come in, loss of business revenue from during that time, and also just a show of support for the local communities. And then finally, we really wanted to do something, I guess, that was uniquely Coke, but in a way that, as you referenced before, was, I guess, true to our brand values, but also authentic. And we had a Coke campaign out at the time called Share a Coke, which is a long-standing campaign that actually started in Australia and went global after 2011, where it has people's names on the cans, which many people might be familiar with. Yeah. And we had a couple of people comment on our social channels at the time about potentially doing something with these cans for Fireys. And we thought sort of long and hard about it in a way that we could do it that was sort of meaningful and wasn't really about recruiting people to the brand or leveraging in any way. So we decided to create a limited edition, sort of volunteer-only run of Share a Coke cans, and they were called Share a Coke with Fireys. And we distributed them through the rural fire services in New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria, as well as through Food Bank and through Amatul's business development executives in all of the local towns as well, just as a way to, show our gratitude and token of thanks to everyone at the time. And it was really, meant as a token of thanks and, a piece of memorabilia that could be
Yeah.
taken with them this time.
I think it was such an uplifting approach for, you know, so many of the volunteers and fireys who obviously were dedicating so much time and, you know, their livelihoods in a sense for fighting the fires. And what I really liked about watching Coke's approach is that, like you said before, you really utilized the system, but I think you activated it really effectively and really authentically and genuinely to help, and also considered the consequences, because part of me was a bit like, oh, okay, Coke are putting out, you know, fireys on cans. Well, if they sell those, then everyone's going to buy them, so the profits are going to soar. So the fact that, you know, you decided not to turn the, you know, product consumer campaign into a fireys consumer campaign, I think was, you know, it showed the genuine intent of the organisation in terms of doing the right thing to help. And I heard lots from, you know, small businesses in many communities who were so grateful and, you know, just really appreciative of the consideration that came from Coke for, you know, helping them with bills and all that kind of stuff, and providing products and services, products into communities as well.
Yeah, thanks, Renae.
Yeah, which is not all brands, I can tell you, because there are certainly a few brands out there who are doing things that weren't getting the same sort of response. So I think, you know, the strategic approach, even if it was reactive to the situation, I think was really considered, and in my opinion, it was really effective, both from your brand, but also from the recipients and those in the communities receiving the help.
Yeah, and it absolutely was, I guess, a decision that we had to make, and obviously, you know, with support from the marketing teams and you know, legal and everyone kind of played a role in that decision. But I think, you know, I guess my thinking with that is always, you know, if you've got the money there to donate the money. Don't do it in a way that you know, where you're asking people to buy something in order to then generate a donation, because you know, it's, again, that is a way that many brands can kind of leverage from these situations, and you know, there is sometimes merit in that, but in this situation we had money there to donate, and this was really, you know, the approach behind this was really about showing our gratitude for the volunteers. So that was,
which definitely came through. And I guess, you know, given the situation they were in, you know, as much as, you know, there were many needs, I think there was nothing more welcome than, you know, a Coke can sort of when they were having a few minutes of rest. Now, can I ask you, moving on, because obviously, you know, we met and we were talking about the bushfires, and, you know, it was unprecedented, and the giving and, you know, the needs from communities was, you know, extraordinary and still is huge. Then, of course, the unexpected COVID-19 arrived. So with COVID-19, how was your response different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, we had a really strong lead in from the bushfires. You know, I think everyone's, you know, obviously on high alert in terms of the disaster space, and also, you know, teams were already kind of mobilized. But it was a really different situation, and a very different situation kind of across the board in terms of, you know, broader impacts on the business, and people not really knowing what or how, or, you know, what space we were going to play. I think from a bushfire perspective, it was, there were obvious and very tangible ways that we could play a role and play a meaningful role. So I think in terms of COVID, our situation has been quite different, but it has been sort of iterative and responsive based on the situation at hand. So, you know, I guess given it was a global pandemic and a global disaster, there was a lot of projects happening at a global level. So we sort of immediately started talking to our global foundation about projects that they were supporting around the world. You know, and I think that's, you know, obviously one of the benefits of working for a big company like Coke, where we could kind of look at what was happening globally and maybe see from, you know, some of the projects that were happening or in markets that were a little bit ahead of us, what their response was like. But we certainly explored a number of things. So again, we looked at, you know, can our supply chain be used in a way that's meaningful and helpful? Can our marketing teams support, you know, government messaging? You know, and we've seen a number of Amateur teams sort of globally or regionally doing things like producing hand sanitizer at some of their plants, face masks and things like that. In Australia, I guess our approach took a little longer to come to and was more thought out based on conversations that we were having with partners. And we really wanted to assess kind of what's the role that we could play in a meaningful way. And we had some challenges around our supply chain during that time from Amatil. So product wasn't an immediate thing that we could necessarily do, as well as broader impacts, to the business as well in terms of what sort of support we could provide. So that's where we've really tapped into those philanthropic networks much more for COVID. So we have tapped into the Global Foundation again and provided a $250,000 grant to the Australian Red Cross COVID-19 Collective. And we're also sort of reprioritising some of our grants through our local Coca-Cola Australia Foundation this year, to sort of reprioritise some of the funding around longer term community resilience and rebuilding as a result of COVID. So it has been quite different, but again, I think the response and the sort of the way that we've come about it has been quite similar in terms of.
And did you kind of have a strategy for this kind of giving or this way of giving before bushfires? Or is it, and I guess, do you have it now? Like, is this your new giving strategy that you've sort of organically developed?
Yeah, I mean, it has certainly allowed us, to start thinking about more planning in this space. We do have a very set giving strategy with both our global and local foundations, and disaster relief is one of those pillars. As part of that, and we have a set amount of funding that we are able to donate every year, and that's fantastic. But I think in terms of the process that we've gone through internally, starting with the bushfires and then leading on to this situation with COVID, has actually allowed us to start to think more broadly around those strategies. And I think also. We haven't had as many. I mean, I've only been at Coke for a couple of years, and these are the first couple of disasters that I've experienced here. And in other organisations, you obviously have sort of set things that you always do around a disaster, and that might be, matching employee funds and looking at philanthropic grants that you can provide and ways that you can support more broadly in the community. But as I said, I think, for us, it's really important that the response is very much tailored to the needs of the community and the needs of the situation at the time, and that you can kind of work from the platforms that you have, the funding rounds that you have, the people within your organisation that are going to lead and guide you through the process, and the resources that you can draw from as well.
Yeah, well, it's and again, from an external perspective looking in, and I don't know much about the business you work for, except for obviously what everyone else knows. But I think the approach, and obviously the approach comes from leaders, and I guess aside from yourself, like who decides at the Australian level, kind of like what you give or how you give, who's you're having regional conversations. Do you have to go through the hierarchy of approvals regionally, or literally does your CEO, can they kind of determine what's that approach been?
Yeah, look, it depends where the funds come from. So I'd say there's probably three main sources of funding that we do tap into. One of those, again, is the Global Foundation, and we, in the Public Affairs and Sustainability team, we put projects forward to the Global Foundation, and we essentially sort of facilitate that funding. But we do go through a round of approvals in terms of our teams here, and then our regional director who's based in Singapore, and then it goes up the chain to the Global Foundation director who's based in Atlanta. But that is very much decided at a local level here, where we want to put funds forward. Same with our local Coca-Cola Australia Foundation, which has an independent board who makes those decisions, and that's a joint philanthropic fund between Amatil and Coke South Pacific, or Australia, really, in Australia. And we have alignment from our leaders, our business leaders here. And then I guess, when we're looking at further funding that comes from the business, obviously we work very closely with our finance director and our business unit president to put cases forward and access further funding from the business wherever it's appropriate. But I would say, one of the things I think maybe a common misconception about a big corporate like Coke is that you do have to climb through lots of layers of red tape. I've actually definitely worked in other organisations where it's been a lot harder. We are actually sort of quite empowered to make decisions, and we can be quite nimble in that way. And I think there's a really nice thing is there is a lot of trust put in, in our teams to make those decisions based on the networks and the partnerships that we have in the community and in the broader kind of stakeholder space as well.
And that's where I think that's where you get, the best outcomes from your giving is when you've got, leadership and leaders of the corporate giving kind of area who understand the business and who invite other people across the business to participate, but ultimately they can provide the expertise, advice in those organisations from a community perspective as well, because there are so many great examples of, tokenistic giving. And I always say token is broken. And if you're going to give for giving's sake, then save your money because it could really come back and bite your brand unless the giving is really authentic and genuine, but more so considered. And again, I think it's been real considered giving from Coke, which obviously is led by yourself and the rest of the team. Now, can I ask you, talk a lot, and we've talked a lot about the disaster relief that Coke provides. Do you do anything in terms of, or do you have any future focus from a resilience perspective, so how you can help invest communities in the before stages of disasters?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a really interesting gap, because I think I would say a lot of our work is done in the sort of the during and the after stage, but I think that question around what can we do before is a really important one, and I think it's one that will certainly start working a little bit more internally. I mean, I guess what I would say to that is we do a lot of work with our partners, outside of, I guess, the broader disaster space, and our big focus with our partnerships is on environment and sustainability. So we do a huge amount of work in terms of clean oceans and water security and water efficiency. And I guess we do have partnerships on an ongoing basis that, we work more broadly. And I think for us, the most important thing is that our partnerships are all, that they're mutually beneficial, but they're also, it's not just about writing a check. It's actually about sitting down with your partner and saying, how can we help? How can we help this partnership? How can we help this program grow? And I sort of feel like all the work that we do just on an ongoing kind of everyday basis, is actually setting us up for supporting them, when these kind of things do happen. So, whether that's leveraging the skills of our employees or looking at volunteering opportunities, or again, leveraging our supply chain, helping to kind of create, better capacity building within the sector, and actually really, really understanding the needs of the partner that we're working with.
So it's almost it's almost kind of integrating organic resilience without focusing on resilience, which I think is so much, so many partnerships and corporate partnerships with philanthropic or communities I think is going to invest into. So
yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask, so just talking about the disaster space from a corporate giving perspective, what do you think's missing? Like, what's the biggest gap for you?
I think, I bang on about it all the time, but I think better opportunities to collaborate, and mobilise the kind of corporate and philanthropic sector is one thing that I'm really passionate about. One of my very, very old colleagues that I used to work with, we had brother-sister relationship, I guess. Our organisations did, not us. We had in that we were part of a precinct, and we were we competed for the same sort of fundraising dollars. I remember him saying to me, sort of back in the day, he said, a rising tide lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. And it's always stayed with me. And I think particularly in this space of philanthropy, corporate giving, community investment and sustainability, we might be competitors on the market, but we're all there to do good in the community, make a difference. Yeah. And I think the more that we can collaborate to integrate our resources and, draw from our strengths and our expertise, the better off we're going to be. And I think that's, I think, also having that recognition that everyone has a role to play. It's not just about NGOs. It's not just about government. It's not just about, corporates, that we all have a different role to play. And I think the more that we can actually come together and collaborate and bring knowledge to the table based on the sectors that we work in, the better off we're going to be. So yeah, that's probably the one thing that I think we probably need more of. I think it's starting to happen a lot more, which is great. Certainly, it was one of the things that really drew me to what the Red Cross is doing through COVID, and it's a COVID collective. That's what they're calling it, and it's basically a collective of corporates that are all coming to the table and providing financial support, but also providing expertise and skills across their organisations and sectors. So, starting a working group in a couple of weeks' time, and actually really building from this situation and making some good things, good opportunities out of what is a dire situation.
And they say out of every disaster comes opportunities. But I have to say, Anna, what you've just said is just music to my ears. And I guess the whole foundation of why I established Corporate to Community is because we all have a role to play. And that was identified, 10 years ago by the National Strategy for Disaster Resilience, that businesses and governments and communities and individuals, everyone has a role to play. And I think, it's testament that what we've experienced during the bushfires and now during COVID with the likes of the collective working groups is when we do come together, we are stronger, and we can come together as stakeholders, identifying, what each of us can contribute. And yes, there's the competitive landscape that we need to be respectful of, but ultimately we're all people living in Australia trying to survive, the disaster impacts to come. And I think the more we understand that, and the more we can understand how to work in that kind of environment, the better off we'll be. And I'm super excited because in October this year, we have a bit of a launch happening for our Resilient Australia Alliance concept, which is wholly based on collaboration. So it's based on how stakeholder groups, government, businesses, communities, not-for-profits can work together to create solutions and outcomes. Now, I normally finish by asking you two things that you'd like to be done differently in the disaster space, but I kind of feel like you've answered it already. Unless you've got anything else that you want to pop in apart from collaboration.
Oh, I mean, they are probably the two things, collaboration. And I think, look, I did touch on it before as well, but I guess more of a recognition from the broader community that everyone does have a role to play, and that we can all work together in a really positive way. I think, so often, you do see, I think particularly corporates, I think there is a general perception that, that corporates are a little bit nameless and faceless and potentially heartless. And I work with a bunch of, super passionate, wonderful people who genuinely want to make a difference. And I do see the role that corporates can play, and that they can play a meaningful role, in collaboration. And I think, from a partnership perspective, when you can get that sort of golden triangle situation where governments, NGOs, business community are all coming together, I think that's where you get the really, really wonderful outcomes.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And I think, our communities are going to be facing more and more disasters, as are our businesses. So the more we can, understand how to work better together, and then just do it. Let's not write strategies or frameworks about it anymore. Let's just learn how to do it and to do it, because we're all going to be better off for the outcome of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna, Public Affairs and Sustainability Manager at Coca-Cola South Pacific. It's been really good chatting to you about doing disasters differently in the perspective of how unprecedented disasters can provide new ways for corporate giving. And as I said before, I think Coca-Cola is a really great example of great giving throughout the bushfires and COVID-19. And I think corporate giving is a really important element when it comes to before, during and after disasters. And we need more corporate giving, and the communities almost expect corporates to participate and give corporate goodwill. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Renae. It's been great fun and love the work that you're doing.
That's the end of this episode of Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast, which I hope you found to be relevant, informative, and inspiring. If you're interested in participating in the conversation or to connect with me personally, please visit corporate2community.com. Until the next episode, stay safe, and remember, we all have a role to play in thinking differently and doing differently before, during, and after disasters.